Now it is time to introduce our main speaker for tonight, Kansas.
Hi, my name's Kansas. I'm an alcoholic. My watch for your protection. Thank you, Strawberry, for asking me to come up and talk. And drove up. My home group is the All North County Young People's Group down in Oceanside, California. So coming from San Diego, the north part of San Diego County. Actually, not bad. Not bad. Sorry?
Dr. Paul's area.
No, actually not. Good try, though. My sponsor's name is Paul, though. Different Paul, though. But my sobriety date's July 2nd, 96. I was 18 years old when I came to the room of Alcoholics Anonymous. I haven't picked up a drink or a drug since coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. If your story is that you have, you're as welcome here as anybody else. If this is the only version of, the story that you've started in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you're new, can be the only version you ever have, though. You don't ever have to do a round two. There are a lot of us that walk into the rooms of AA and never pick up again. And as you hear as I get into my story, that it's not because we're any less qualified. It's not because we're any less qualified to be in these rooms. I was born back east, actually Massachusetts. I was born in Worcester. So you have to know, you can tell who's been back there if you know how to say it properly. But lived in Rhode Island as a kid. My mother had me when she was 16. I was the second. She had another kid at 14 that she had put up for adoption. Had another kid at 18. It was my sister, who was born with a condition called spina bifida. So her spine was open when she was born, and had what do you call it? Didn't have bladder control, things like that. It was, she had to wear diapers all through life, So I always sort of reflect back on her life because, all of the imagined sort of catastrophes and tragedies of my own, I just sort of think, some of hers were actually real. And I remember being about 6 months sober and going into, I can't even, I was upset about something that I have no idea what it was to this day. It was probably something really stupid, like, I don't know, I ran out of gas or something, and I was just in a funk over it. And I went into the hospital because she had lost a lot of blood. She was having dialysis and transfusions and things like that all the time, and she had lost a lot of blood. And she was writing poetry. And it wasn't like that really dark, angsty, emo, hot topic poetry either. It was like, I remember one line of it was, "Little white spots turning into red dots, you stand as witness to my mental unfitness." And she's saying it in this sort of chipper little voice. And I'm thinking, and it just, the contrast of her attitude versus my attitude was amazing. It really put into perspective who I was and who I needed to be. I have this obsessive sponsor. He's been sober 39 years, so I think he gets bored with going through the big book, so he creates ways to go through it. So he, and I'm not talking about for me, he does this to himself. He went through and actually typed up everything that he could find that was a reference toward attitude in the first 164 pages. I think he came up with 147 things that he felt like were references toward our attitudes changing as part of our recovery from alcoholism. And I thought that was just, it's really profound for me to think about that. That was the experience I was having at 6 months of sobriety, was that if I was going to stay here, if I was going to continue in this, if I was going to get better here, because that is the point of this, is to actually get better here. I was going to have to go through significant changes in the attitudes that I brought into Alcoholics Anonymous. I was going to have to go through major changes and overhauls in who I was and how I saw the world and how I saw you and how I thought that you saw me. I was going to have to actually change. When I joined Alcoholics Anonymous, nobody thought I was overreacting. Well, with the exception of one guy, He had never seen me drink before, though. I was in a sober living with, it was called an Oxford House, and they're a small sort of organization that's, throughout more of the country. I don't know if there are many of them in LA. We don't have any in San Diego. But it was, I lived there because it was the only place I could really afford to live at the time. And there was a guy in there I was much younger than everybody else in there, and there was a guy in there he had been a Vietnam era veteran, and he did not understand why I might be sobering up at 18 years old, and he kept trying to convince me to get drunk. And so much so that when he got drunk, he started hiding bottles in my room. But it's a good thing to reflect back on now, and because I remember finding that, he was obviously a vodka drinker because I kept finding empty fifths. And he and I didn't get along very well, so he was trying to get me kicked out of there. But I was upfront about it, and I was honest about it. So every time I found one of them, I'd bring it out of my room, and I'd show my house members, and we basically voted you off the island if you screwed up. We didn't have a manager or anything. We just sort of ran it ourselves, and it's sort of an adopted form of the traditions. And the guys in there never doubted me, and I think that had much more to do with attitude than it had to do with anything else. Had much more to do with the attitude that I had presented. They had seen me go into meetings. They had seen me actively engaged in a recovery lifestyle. I've worked with a lot of new people over the years, and that has way more to do with it than anything else. Whether if I can tell somebody's really hurting, I watch, and as that begins to soften, and as it begins to change, and the attitude of willingness starts to emerge in this person, I can start to have some hope in them, and I can start to build some sort of a relationship with them. Until then, I'm a little bit hesitant. My approach to them is much more of just kind of being of service to them. I don't approach them the same way, and that's to protect myself. I've had a sponsee put a gun in his mouth and take his life. I've experienced these kind of things in Alcoholics Anonymous. We had a kid 3 weeks ago that's been in and out for the last 4 years, overdose, down in my area. And it was sort of every few years. You stay around the rodeo long enough, you kind of see that every few years the group will lose somebody, and it'll leave an impact on the group. And it causes at least a temporary shift in attitude. And all of a sudden, everybody takes seriously what it says in our book, where what it says that everybody wants to write a fourth step as soon as a group member dies. Prior to that, where it's as if we're reading the book, and it says we finished our third, we dicked around, we built up some willingness, and then we did our fourth step. But I have this sponsor that takes me through the book in this painfully tedious manner, and so every time it says we did this, we do that. And one of the things that he loves to point out to me, and I've taken to loving to point out to other people, is that it actually says next we launched onto a course of vigorous action. It doesn't say what I thought it said for some reason, and for some reason when that kind of loss happens in a group, everybody reads it the right way. They stop putting their own spin on it, and all of a sudden, all my sponsees start showing up with pads of paper, and there's ink smeared all over it, and they've got ink on their fingers, and they're ready to go. And I don't know why it takes that sometimes. I don't know why this kid's one of the ones that doesn't make it, and some of the others that I've seen over the years, but it's true. It happens. And I know that it impacted the kids around my area a lot. Anyway, I don't know how any of that happened. You asked me if it was a canned talk. There's your answer. No, not at all. So I sort of growing up, everything was sort of a mess. Mom was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic. In the last month, she's actually become homeless. She's continued. I didn't know my father until I was 19. I was a year sober when I knocked on his door. And introduced myself to him, unannounced, of course, because I'm alcoholic. I like shock value. Told him that I said it's been 19 years since we've seen each other. I figure we ought to get to know each other. I'm going to move in. He said, "Oh, I just got a drunk driving. You could work for me and drive so that I can keep my job." So it all worked out. The family disease of alcoholism, sort of worked out just fine. But so, so I grew up without a father, and my mother has never been married, and so, I sort of every once in a while somebody will say to you, is that your half sister? Da, 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 da. I don't know what the difference is. We all sort of were connected to mom, but had different dads, and none of them were around. So, grew up kind of watching her drinking, watching the consequences of her drinking, promising I would never pick up a drink, pouring out her alcohol as a kid. Taking her alcohol to the sink and pouring it out when she wasn't around because, anything especially whiskey, there was a difference in my house between beer drunk and whiskey drunk. Whiskey drunk was scary. It's like if she came in whiskey drunk, you knew some kid was going to get hit in the house that night. And so since my older brother had been put up for adoption, I kind of grew up as the oldest. And I actually met him 2 years ago in Massachusetts. He still lives up there, and my sister found him through Facebook. So good kid, social worker, I like him. I think it was probably somewhere around 13, 14. I was stealing. I was running around, breaking into cars. I was breaking into houses, all this kind of stuff. And my friend and I decided to break our number one rule. We had watched enough television to know that you never go back to the scene of the crime. And so we went back for the bar, basically. We had sort of ransacked this house and stolen a bunch of things, and went back to this house and took all the alcohol. We took it to my house because you could kind of do whatever you wanted at my house, and we lined up all of the alcohol, and it was almost as if I knew something was going to change at this moment, because we set it up like a shrine, and I mean, I don't remember candles. I don't think we actually had them, but I sort of remember it with candles, if that makes sense. Which is fitting, because I think when I took a drink that day, it was the first time I ever had any kind of spiritual experience. I think it was the first time that my spirit started to change, that my attitude, my mind altered, everything started to change, and everything inside of me was okay for a minute. And my drink of choice that day was Triple Sec. Prior to that, it had been Orange Minute Maid, and this was probably the closest thing to it. I have a teenage alcoholic story, so I've never had wine that's seen a grape. Mad Dog 2020 was my favorite wine. I don't think that if you were going to put together some sort of a legal classification system that you would find Mad Dog 2020 as a wine. In my neighborhood it was. So, I drank crap. There was nothing sophisticated about my drinking. It was drink to blackout. Whatever we can get our hands on, putting together the most of it, the most alcohol we could, and then shortly thereafter adding as many drugs as we possibly could. I know that there's been sort of a theme in the last few years to start using expressions like, and then I did some outside issues. I'm not going to do that. I think it sounds stupid, for one. And I'm just not willing to sound, if I'm judging them, then I just don't want to be judged that way. But more than anything, I don't believe that it's an adherence to our 12 traditions. I've been a general service representative 3 times and a DCM, and I very much believe in our traditions. But part of it is that identification is the first part of a new person finding Alcoholics Anonymous and surviving, the illness that we came in here with. And last night, I have never been to an AA meeting that handed out a secret AA decoder rings at the door. And, until I go to that meeting, I'm not going to speak in a language that pleases old timers who are fussy and kills newcomers. I'm going to tell my story exactly how it was and exactly how it is. And that's just sort of for my own integrity, that I need to do it that way. And so a week after I took a drink, I started smoking pot. A week after that, I started taking LSD. A week after that, my friend showed up with 40 ounces of methamphetamine. And my drinking accelerated at that point. And by this time, I'm living in Kansas, so these things do happen in the Midwest, too. That's the moniker. Kansas is a moniker, but, it's been my name for a long time now. So, I was often running, and I was a garbage can. I'd take whatever was around and possible, and, I wasn't worried about how I was going to have to tell my story in an AA meeting someday. But fortunately, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, they told me that alcohol needed to be one of my problems, and that they didn't care what other problems I had, that I could bring those too. I could bring all of my problems to Alcoholics Anonymous. They couldn't solve them all, but they'd give me a life to deal with. They knew that I wasn't going to be able to leave half of who I was at the door and get better. I was going to have to become all of who I was. And as long as alcohol was one of my problems, I was going to do just fine here. And, I remember some of those things. It's like I like to tell some of the stories, where my sponsor was tough and all of that stuff, but the things that I remember the most were phrases like, be careful how you treat the newcomer. One of them could be your sponsor someday. And one of the other things that I remember most was my sponsor had a couple of kids, and we didn't have sort of a thriving community of young people in Topeka, Kansas. There were 3 of us. I lied about sleeping with one of them when I had 30 days. She was therefore not willing to be my friend. The other one became my stalker. I was therefore not willing to be her friend. And so it was hang out with who you hang out with, it was do your best. And so I got a job at a coffee shop. I was living in a halfway house and then an Oxford house. And right after that, I end up, I'm getting off work and I'm going over to my sponsor's house, and I'm just being there. I've got nowhere else to be, but I'm just hanging out there. I'm sitting with his family when they have dinner, and then I'm going to the meeting at night. And I'm doing this every day because I don't know what the hell else to do. I can't afford to go out and hang out and do all this stuff. I'm not going to hang out with my old friends. I had just aged out of the foster system. From 15 on, I was in foster care. I had been in and out of juvenile institutions and juvenile hall and all of these different places. At 15, I got the brilliant idea to. My friend and I were breaking into cars, and we found the keys to a shiny 1986 Mercury Topaz, and apparently thought that a 1986 Mercury Topaz was worth a lot more than it is, and stole the car and decided to take it to Clearwater, Florida, where we were going to buy cocaine and then take it back to Kansas and turn it into crack, because we thought we'd make more money with it that way. And but so we were going to chop the car, basically. Naive, but it was worthy of a grand theft auto going across state lines, which is a federal felony. A year later, I was picked up for home invasions. We had gotten progressively more violent, and I was doing home invasions and breaking into houses with people home and attacking them. And those are not fun amends. But our step said we made direct amends, so we made direct amends. I never got caught for that, so I ended up sitting down with a man that I had figured out who he was, and he didn't know that we had actually become friends. He didn't know that I knew, or that I was the one who had done that to him, and I sat him down and talked to him about it. I mean, there's a guy I woke up, maced and then beat up with a baseball bat when I'm 15, 16 years old. And, I walk away from this. I walk out of the house, and everybody's sort of slapping each other on the back about how big of a tough guys we were and all this stuff. And but inside, I'm needing a drink. I need a drink to deal with what I'm doing. It's not who I am. Inside I'm I'm more who you see today. I mean, I've grown up a lot since then, but my heart's the same. And, I just needed another drink. It was a night that started with somebody saying, I have an idea. And I will tell you, alcoholic or not, you take 4 or 5 teenage boys and put them in the same place, collectively we lose IQ points. This is a sum that is smaller than its parts. And and that's true sober too. You put a bunch of knuckleheads together, we get dumb quick. That's why it's important to have our old timers around us. They sort of bring up the mean. But so I end up in this foster home, and that was actually a good experience for me. And I tried to shape up. I tried to get out of a lot of the criminal stuff, and kind of going into this foster home, I had gone from raised by wolves to the Beaver Cleaver family at this point. And I tell one story to kind of sum up my family, to give you an idea of where I came from. And so I too was delusional and psychotic in my drinking and using. And there was a series of days where I was looking under where I would look under the bedroom door, and this light would come on and it would go off. And it would come on and it would go off. And I realized at some point that it was like 6 or 7 days had gone by, and that light was the sun. And when you stay awake for 6 or 7 days reading Revelations under a blanket with a flashlight, scary things start to occur within the mind. And so I came to the conclusion that I was Jesus Christ. Now, I was an atheist at the time, so this was confusing for me. I also found it burdensome. I was not interested in the job. On the pro and con list, the water into wine thing was in the pro list, but that was probably the only thing. I had been reading Revelation, so I was sure that meant that I was back and I was supposed to do a lot of work now. So I decided I needed to sort this out. I had a lot on my mind. So I went over to my mother's house. She's living in a meth lab by this point, and I went over to her for counsel and shared with her what I thought might be the case, what might be true. And she began to cry, as you would expect. She starts to cry, and she just wells up, and the tears are flowing down her face. And she looks at me and she says, "I've always wondered if you were." My chances were not good in life in general. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous 18 years old. I had an 8th grade education. I had not gone to high school at all. There are certain gaps in my education that I realized today. I had to go back and read The Great Gatsby. I had not heard of it. I was done with college, and all of a sudden I needed to go back and read these, sort of some of these classic books and things like that, just because there were things that you read in the 10th grade or whatever, and I just had not gone to high school. I had a full-time job that, breaking into cars and breaking into houses and the hours were not consistent with school. We had 3rd shift hours, so I stopped going. And, I remember the last time I was kicked out. Well, I don't remember the last time that I was kicked out, but I've been told that I was assessed for diabetes because I was so adequately denying my drinking that they thought that maybe that it was the floral scent when somebody's about to have a diabetic seizure. You can start to smell that on them. And in a blackout, I had convinced the principal in my high school that I was not drunk. And so they were assessing me for that. I ultimately ended up getting kicked out of school. But I hadn't gotten any credits. And so I come to Alcoholics Anonymous. Basically, I'd walked out of that foster home. I had just blown it. I'd wanted to walk out of there the right way, paying some kind of tribute or respect to what this family had done for me. They had taken me in and treated me like one of their own. And like I said, kind of Beaver Cleaver family. I felt like an alien the whole time I was there. But I knew that I was cared for. I knew that somebody gave a crap about me finally. And And it's my evidence that it's not a matter of whether we're loved enough. That's not what gets us better. It's not necessarily whether we're loved enough, because they did that. I experienced that. It's not how much somebody cared about me or what their intent was or even how well they did it. That wasn't going to be enough for me to sober up. I had to know what alcoholism was. I think I knew that I was a long time before I ever came. I didn't really understand what it meant, though. I didn't understand that it meant that I could never pick up the first drink. I didn't understand that when you get hit by a train, it's not the caboose that kills you. And I kept picking up the first drink. I'd say, I'd try to control. I'd try to control and enjoy it. I had tried for a long time, and I was just getting crazier and crazier and crazier doing it. And that was the insanity that I was restored to, knowing that I am a person who can never pick up the first drink. I mean, that's the sanity that I have today from Alcoholics Anonymous. So I walked into an emergency room. I had left their home, and I was, I'm living in a dope house, and I'm out of anything. I don't have anything to bring to the table, and I'm just sort of desperate, and I end up going to, I go to my mother's house. I figure I'm going to spend the last little bit of money that I've got and try to bring something back and maybe buy a day or two more. And when I go over there, they said, "We're being watched by the police. You've got to leave right now." And so I just drive around for a little while, and while I was driving around, I'm thinking, and I'm trying to decide whether or not to check into the local detox that my mom's loser boyfriends are all, where she goes to find them. I think she used it as a dating service. Or if I was going to, if I was going to go back to the East Coast, and I was going to go back to New England because I hadn't burned all my bridges there. And while I'm driving around, I started to see all these sparkly bumper stickers that I'd never seen before. I didn't know what they were, but they all said the same thing. They all said Easy Does It. And I had no idea what Easy Does It meant. I had never been to AA. I had never heard it before. I just knew that it was bothering me. It was sticking out to me, and I went back and I asked my mother what it was, and she had been to treatment before, and she told me what it meant, and I kind of took that as my sign. And so I went into the emergency room a couple days later, and I just told them I needed help. When all else fails, you can go to the ER. It doesn't matter what else is going on, you can always go to the ER. And if you're not in the middle of dying, they make you wait a while. But I did. I sat and I waited for a while, and they put me into a local community funded program, and I started this path. I went through my detox, and 9 of us sat in a room and we shook together, and they kept the air conditioner cold for us so we wouldn't sweat as much, and we were okay. We got to the other side of it and we were okay. And what I've found in this program is that the very beginning was the most important part of my journey here in a lot of ways. The foundation that I built in the very beginning of my program was it was like I see it as sort of for building the house. It's the house that I've got to live in, and I guess I got that from, I sort of got that perspective because I'm gonna flash forward for a second and kind of give you an idea where that came from. I had done a 6th and 7th step, and so I went to my sponsor because I said something that probably wouldn't have bothered me, but I offended a friend, a guy that I'd gotten sober with. I had offended him. I'd said something that hurt his feelings, and it really bothered me a lot more than I thought that it ever would have before. And so I went back to my sponsor and I said, I don't understand why this bothers me so much, why I'm feeling so much more guilty about this. And he said, well, remember that house you lived in before? He said, that's what it was like inside of you. And in that house, nobody cares if you spill something. Nobody cares if you knock over a drink. Nobody cares if you leave laundry out, or if the dishes stay in the sink, or if the paint's peeling, or if the place stinks. If you spill something on that carpet, who notices? But you've been doing these steps and you've been cleaning out your insides, and now it contrasts. Now when you do something to the brand new carpet, it sticks out. And that was, and so I started to sort of take this perspective that's kind of what's happening inside of me. in doing that, I see the beginning was that, I'm laying the concrete. I'm laying the concrete, and I've knocked over that house so many times in sobriety. When you come in, at least for me, when coming in as young as I did, there's this thing that happens where, I got some of the stuff about how cute it was that I was sober and all that kind of stuff, and I rebelled against it, but I secretly liked some of it too, and but the thing that the thing about that, though, that is significant, that I don't know if you can know unless you go through it, is that we end up with time sober before we end up with life experience. I remember being 21 and having 3 years of sobriety and having men ask me to sponsor them, and I couldn't sponsor them. I remember how hard it was for me to practice our 12th suggestion. It said that nothing will so much ensure us immunity from the first drink as intensive work with other alcoholics. I had to invent and create ways to do that because I didn't have the life experience to show a man how to work our program with his family. I didn't understand that. I had nothing to attach that to. I didn't have a story to tell him. I really envied some of you that came to Alcoholics Anonymous out of a blackout with a law degree. That must have been nice for you to get to drink through school. That wasn't my story. My story was that I spent 7 years doing the community college plan and doing some things well in AA and making some mistakes along the way, and sometimes dropping the house, but everything went back to the foundation. And so, I think about this, the things that we suggest, like going to 90 meetings in 90 days, launching into a vigorous inventory, and I'm glad that I did those things. I'm really grateful that I did those things, because every time I've fallen apart, whether it was because of life circumstance or because of my own behavior, I've had to go back to that to start rebuilding again. There are some times in my sobriety where I'm really good with 10, 11, or 12, and I sort of see those as like preventative medicine, and I can stay well with those. And then there are other times where, unfortunately, I've gotten really good at some of our intervention, some of the more intervention type steps. Oh boy, here's a mess. 4th step, 5th step, 6th, 7, and 8 and 9 again. And I've gotten a lot of practice with those over the years too. Every time, though, I'm going back to the beginning. I'm going back to what I started with. I've always said that AA works best when I'm at my worst. That's when I do this thing the best. Is the way that I did it in the very beginning, when I'm falling apart, when I'm destroyed inside, when I feel spiritually bankrupt. All of a sudden, things that sound trite and stupid and that I questioned, all of a sudden sound like really good ideas. I'm just not fussy anymore. All of a sudden, some of the silly cliches that you have to say sound like the most wonderful thing I've ever heard in my life. If I could make myself think that way all the time, my life would be great. It seems like I have to sort of paint myself in a corner sometimes to get there. It's unfortunate, and I'm getting better at it. I'll tell you some other time if I ever get it right. But I've gotten it right enough to not drink, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the foundation that we built in the beginning. I've gone through a lot of things in sobriety. Going through school was, starting off with the 7-year community college plan. Coming out of foster care, I didn't have family support or anything like that. I'm working part-time and working full-time through all that stuff. And, it took a while. There's some, I remember, I had the $250 car with the duct tape on the top of it, and then when that one broke down, I got the next car that I got arrested for driving because something had happened with a previous owner. I didn't stay arrested, but I got arrested in the parking lot of my work, which went over really well on your second day on the job. But all worked out. You live on, you develop a good track record. These things work themselves out. But I remember one semester I'm going to community college, and the bus stopped running to the community college. What? So, I ended up having to drop a semester because I couldn't get the transportation I needed in order to get there. And, so it was like, and then there were other ones where I just didn't get the work done, so over time it ended up taking time. But by sort of staying in there, eventually here's your bachelor's degree, here's your master's degree, here's your license in your profession. All of these things start to unfold, and things go really well that way. There were other things that happened 8 years ago. I went through probably what was the most difficult time in my sobriety. I mentioned that sponsee killing himself, and that happened in the midst of a lot of loss for me. And I was at work, and I get a call that my sister's been shot by her ex-husband. He comes in and shoots her in front of my niece, and then kidnaps my niece, and then shoots himself in front of her. I'd had lost 2 grandparents a month prior to that in the same week. My old roommate passed away, who used to have the same sobriety date as me, from DTs in his 30s. Then my sister with spina bifida dies 2 or 3 months after my other sister dies. So it was sort of one of these times in sobriety where, I remember leaning on my sponsor in the beginning and wanting him to give me a page number to read or tell me which meeting to go to or how many commitments to have, and that something in Alcoholics Anonymous was going to work as a fix the way that my alcohol and drugs worked as a fix to alter my state and to alter my attitudes, and there was nothing. Alcoholics Anonymous didn't offer a quick fix. And my option at the time was to sit still and hurt. I needed to sit still and hurt and walk through the feelings and try to live my life in accordance with the principles in our program so that I didn't back myself into the kind of corner that would cause me to drink. I needed to be as good of a son as I could be. I needed to do my best to stay active in service. I started my home group that year. There were a lot of things that saved me that year by being active in service in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I survived it. There were 2 things that did happen that were a direct result of the relationships I've developed here. There was a girl in our group she was then 16. She had 3 years of sobriety. Nobody thought she was overreacting when she joined AA either. She came over to my house and really didn't know what to say when all of this was going on. I didn't really know what to say. I was pretty much just sort of frozen on my couch. And she came into my house and she just sort of bumbled through without really saying much, and she went in my kitchen and just started washing my dishes. And I'll never forget her doing that for me. I'll never forget her showing up and being of service to me that way, and what that meant for me at that time. And there was an old timer that didn't try to say anything. There were some times when I'd sort of keep the people in my meetings up to date with what was going on, and they would just they would either get uncomfortable and walk away because they didn't, whatever was inside of them, that they didn't know how to fix it or whatever the case. And, there's one of the old timers in my group didn't try to say, there were no magic words, and he knew it. And he just put his hand on my shoulder and he says, "I love you, kid," and he hugged me, and that was it. And I'll never forget it. He was just warm to me when I needed warmth. I needed warmth, and I needed reassurance, and I needed kindness, and he gave that to me in the moment when I needed it. He didn't try to fix anything. So I found that the circle and triangle is all important for me to have in order to stay healthy myself. But I need others who are doing that around me too. I can't do this on my own. I can't stay sober on my own. I can't have a decent life on my own. Because of my involvement in Alcoholics Anonymous and joining Alcoholics Anonymous, I have come to have a life that wasn't in store for me. It was not in the cards for me. I had psychiatric institutions in the cards for me. I had prisons in the cards for me. I was probably going to have misspelled tattoos that were made with a Walkman. That's what it was in the cards for me. Instead, I have a career and an education and a reasonably good life now. And so I think I'm out of time. So I just want to say thank you for having me at your group. And I know I can be kind of monotone, so most of you guys stayed awake, so that's pretty good. Thanks.